Can everybody hear me okay? Is the mic working? Good? Good, awesome. Okay, well, what's up, New York City? Woohoo! All right, well, I have been traveling for the past 6 weeks, and it feels so amazing to be back. In fact, one of the things that I look forward to the most whenever I come home is getting a big slice of New York City pizza. Who here loves pizza? Yeah, a lot of hands. Yeah, there is nothing more quintessential New York than pizza. And it's one of the things I look forward to the most. So fun fact about me, actually, home for me is across the river in Hoboken, New Jersey. So I always say I'm from the city. I actually live in Hoboken, AKA the 6th borough of New York. I see a couple Brooklynites shaking their heads, ready to boo me. But I think that Hoboken honestly deserves to be the 6th borough, and the reason why is because the New York Times actually declared that the best pizza in New York City is across the river in Jersey. So next time you want to hate on Hoboken or Jersey, just remember this fact. So when I'm not arguing about pizza, I actually lead a team at Apollo focused on developer experience. And one of my, really my main goal is to make sure that everybody here in this room is successful and productive with GraphQL. And it's something that I really love and something that I really enjoy, getting to travel all around the world and teaching everyone about GraphQL. So when people ask me what GraphQL is, probably one of the most common responses that I have is that GraphQL is a way to communicate between a client and an API. And oftentimes that API is a GraphQL server, but it doesn't have to be. It can actually be a local cache, as you'll see later. But the way that you communicate is with a query, and it's just like that one that you see in the middle. We've seen this all before. The client requests the query, and the API returns the response in exactly the same shape that we requested. So this is great, but I'm actually going to take a semi-controversial stance today that GraphQL is really not about data over the wire. It's not about smaller payloads or fewer round trips or preventing overfetching. And yes, these are definitely technical benefits of GraphQL, but to me, they're actually not the most compelling reasons to adopt GraphQL. Because, as we all know here, people who've gone through it before, adopting GraphQL is a major shift in an organization. But I think actually the best part about GraphQL is really, not all this stuff, but the productivity boost it brings to developers everywhere at all levels of the stack. So the excellent developer experience, this is really where GraphQL shines. And it's the reason why your team should adopt it. So you're probably wondering, why should we make a serious technical decision based solely on developer experience? Shouldn't we be optimizing for the user experience instead? I think it should be a balance, really. Developer happiness and developer productivity are so, so, so important because they help us ship products faster, they help us attract the best engineers to our teams, and they help us retain engineers once they join us. And ultimately, I think good developer experience will help you build the best user experience that you can. So what does great developer experience actually look like? So in the words of the great Marie Kondo, great developer experience should spark joy. And while it's not always possible to KonMari your developer tooling and get rid of the ones you hate, it's really funny, actually. The first time that I gave this talk, at this point in the talk, I made a joke about Webpack as one of the developer tools that we should KonMari. But I have Sean Larkin staring me down in the back corner, so I'm not going to do that today. I love Webpack. But anyway, we can't just KonMari our developer tools. We really just want to be able to make more informed choices for how we use future technologies. So what does it mean for a developer tool to spark joy? After all, it is a little bit subjective. So before I gave this talk I actually conducted a super scientific poll on Twitter, and these were actually the most common themes that came up in the responses. And a lot of people also mentioned specific tools that kind of fit these principles. So the first one I'd like to talk about, good developer experience, it should just get out of your way. It should kind of like let you just focus on developing. It should allow you to get into your flow state and not interrupt you. And the tool that really came to mind and kind of embodied that for me was Prettier. So who remembers like the first time they used Prettier? Yeah, it was like really amazing. All of a sudden I could just like write all this like janky code, hit save, and it magically like fixed everything for me. And if I had like a type error, it would like warn me about that too. And now it's just like something that's a normal part of our development workflow. We don't think about it anymore. So I think it's not obtrusive, it gets out of the way, and it really just lets us focus on developing. So the second kind of common theme that came up was that good developer experience should be predictable. Like APIs should be predictable, intuitive, easy to understand. And I think that React's component model actually does a really great job of this. So your UI is predictable. It's a function of your props plus your state. So finally, we have VS Code and TypeScript, which are really amazing together because they give you instant feedback about the code that you're writing. And I think another thing that all three of these tools have in common, so Prettier, React, and VS Code, is that they've all filled a void in developers' lives. Tools with a great developer experience, they solve problems. And this is exactly the way I felt when I first learned GraphQL. It took like a couple weeks for me to get my head around it, but once I did, it was amazing to see how much more productive I became. And that's because GraphQL solved a real problem that I had. And the problem was data fetching. So data fetching in React, it's not really the best experience, and that's because React takes a really unopinionated stance towards how you should fetch your data. And sometimes this often results in us writing a lot of manual code that makes up the majority of our application. So Adam, he's an engineer at Airbnb, and he actually said that 90% of their 2 million line code base is dedicated to styling and data fetching. That's a lot. So like if the majority of our time is spent data fetching, that's probably where we want to start if we want to improve the front-end development experience. And I think to really get the most out of React, what you need is a data layer. So here's an example of data fetching, some data fetching code with hooks. And don't worry if you can't see it. It's not like super important that you understand everything that's going on. By the way, I think hooks are really great. Like I think they're a definite improvement over the class component model when it comes to reusing your code, but what they don't solve is the data fetching problem. And when I look at this code, a couple questions come to mind. So the first question is, like, what is the shape of my data? In order to figure out like what result.data actually is, I either have to console log it, I have to open up Postman and like hit my API, or I have to like bug the grumpy backend developer that sits behind me. Like those are really the only three ways. It's not really super intuitive like what my data actually is. So then the next question that I have is like, how do I track loading and error states? Like this is something that is going to pop up nearly every time that we fetch data. So like, how do I do that with this code? And the third really kind of main concern that I have is how do I cache it? You want to be able to navigate away from a certain screen, and even after that component mounts, I want to be able to return back to that screen and have the data automatically there for a nice snappy user experience. So these are kind of the three questions I have when doing data fetching with like bare bones React. And that's why I think in order to use React successfully in production applications, you need a data layer. So the most popular like data layer that people use today is Redux. And when people need a cache, they usually take all their data fetching code and they just dump it into Redux. And Redux is great, but at its core, it's literally just a simple event emitter. And to get it to behave like a cache, you have to layer a bunch of middleware and packages like Normalizer, and you have to like do selectors, like you have to write all this code. It's a lot. And the same thing goes for context. Like that was designed to solve the problem of passing props down multiple levels. It's not a data cache. And when your provider unmounts, all your data will disappear with it. So what we really need is the tool to do the job that we actually intended. We need a data cache. So when I say this, like, people sometimes take like the idea of a data cache like way too seriously, and they start dumping like all of their code, like all of their UI state, like animation state. I think that's what happened with Redux. We got like really like overzealous about this, and we started putting all our data into the cache, especially UI state that wouldn't be there. So I want all of us to raise their hand and repeat after me. Hands up, hands up. Okay, awesome. I promise that I won't put all my UI state into my cache. Awesome, yay, okay, you heard it here first. We are not going to put all of our UI state into our cache today. We are going to use React state where it makes sense, and then when we actually need to reuse something across multiple components, then we'll put it into the cache. Really, like, I think the key to improving our lives as React developers is optimizing this data layer, since it's really where you spend the most of your time. It's also about choosing the right tools for the job, like a data cache. So if we can do these two things, then can we improve developer experience? With GraphQL, I actually think we can. And I can show you like way better than I can tell you. So the next part of this talk is going to be some live demos, so you can see really for yourself that implementing GraphQL with Apollo is that missing piece of the stack that makes React come to life. So while I'm getting set up, everyone just please cross your fingers and let's have a moment of silence for the conference Wi-Fi, meetup Wi-Fi, I guess whatever it's called, holiday Wi-Fi. Okay, awesome. Okay. Can everybody see that okay? If you're in the back and you can't see my font, clap twice. All right, let's bump it up one more time. How about now? Clap twice if you can't see it. No claps. All right, we are good to go. Okay, so the demo I am going to be showing you today is actually the demo from the Redux tutorial app. So here's kind of what it looks like, to do data fetching with Redux. And I'm sure if you worked in a Redux application, you've seen this before. So we have our action creators right here. We have a whole lot of actions and code that we have to write in order to track our loading state and whether we've received our data, and also to invalidate it as well. I'm not going to spend too much time going over this. We're using Thunks as our async middleware for async actions. And then once we have like our action creators, then we have to go over and we have to write our reducers. So we write those. So we have like a lot of code there, and then we go into our app and we use the higher order component and map state to props, yada yada. We've seen this all before. So basically what the app does is it fetches data from a remote API, in this case the Reddit API, and it allows you to refresh, and you can kind of change the different subreddits here, and that's what it does. So this is really cool, but this is kind of a lot of code to write for such a simple application. So let's actually refactor this app to Apollo and TypeScript, which I think is really like the modern app stack of 2019. So I'm just going to open up here the new app that we have. Okay, so this is what it looks like to refactor our app to Apollo and TypeScript. The first thing that we want to start with is our GraphQL server. So you can see in literally just like 40 lines of code, that's all it takes to set up our GraphQL server. We define our data model with our schema over here, and then we write our resolvers. And this is really great because it's not a huge like organizational shift to start refactoring things over to GraphQL. You can literally just start with one endpoint little by little. So once we have our GraphQL server, the next thing that we want to do is we want to be able to connect it to our React app. So we are going to go into our main file. And that's literally all we need in order to write this app is one file. We're not writing action creators, reducers, and then connecting that to our component. All of our logic can be performed in one file. So in order to do that, we just define the data that we want, and we do that with a query. And then we connect that data to our UI with, it used to be a query component, but I'm super excited to show you the new use query hook, which just dropped today. You heard it here first. Yeah, major props to the Apollo client team for building this, and also the community as well. A lot of the inspiration for this API came from one of our contributors' packages, and we're really, really thankful that we were able to kind of test it out in the community first before integrating it into core. So that was just an aside. It's in beta if you want to try it out. We still have to iron out some kinks, but it's mostly working. And yeah, so we use this use query hook to connect our data to our UI. And what's really nice is we're not writing all this code to track our loading and our error state anymore. Apollo just does this for us, so we can just kind of destructure these properties off of the result here, and we even have some handy functions like refetching and also fine-grained network status available to us as well, so we don't have to write that code ourselves. And then once we get our data, we just render our UI, and that's literally all there is to it. So what's really cool about this is Apollo actually has an editor integration, and it works really, really well with VS Code and your data to kind of help you write smarter code. So one of the kind of problems that we had before with our vanilla React data fetching code is we didn't really know the shape of our data. But here with GraphQL, we know all the data that's available to us. So I can just go right here and click Control Space, and here I have all of the available fields that I can query in the selection set. So what's really cool is here I'm just going to do this field upvotes, and I'll see actually the documentation behind that field. The doc string will actually appear right in my editor. So I'm not having to console log the data. I'm not having to make API requests. I'm not having to bug the grumpy backend developer that sits behind me. It's literally all right here. So what's also really cool about this is if I make a mistake, I make typos all day long, this auth will actually come up with a smart suggestion. Did you mean author? My editor is smarter than me and can really help me fix these bugs before they happen. So that's another really cool feature of VS Code. The other cool thing is that VS Code is Schema Aware. So anytime I hover over these fields, I know exactly what their type is. If I want to get more information and peek into my schema, I can just do this right here, and I get access to my remote schema right in my editor. I'm not having to open any windows or GraphQL Playground. It's literally all right here for me. So that's the data fetching experience with Apollo and VS Code. Instead of having to open up all these separate tools and constantly context switch, you can really just kind of enter in that state of flow. The tools get out of the way, and your editor works for you, which is pretty cool. So that was kind of the first demo. The second demo that I want to show you is actually TypeScript. So I refactored this app to TypeScript because I really think it's the future. Just to show hands, how many people use TypeScript here? Okay, quite a few, yeah. We love TypeScript at Apollo. It just helps us catch so many bugs before they happen and helps us to make smarter decisions about our code. But what's really cool is that I actually have the Apollo CLI running. So you'll see here I have these type definitions, and as I add fields to my query, these type definitions, they're going to automatically update. So here I'm just going to add the upvotes field. I'm going to press save, and you'll see that automatically appear right there. So that's really cool. And then once if I want to take it away, I save again, you'll see it goes away. So this is really awesome. Now I can have fully typed React components without doing any effort at all. It's just there, which is really amazing. It's just like provides this super intuitive development experience, and it also leverages the amazing power of GraphQL and the static types to just help make that experience writing React components even better. So what's really awesome about this too is it just kind of guards against like nullability checks as well. So these types propagate from my data fetching components all the way down to my presentational components. And let's just see what happens if I move this. I'm going to open up the compiler here just so we have it and move to here. Okay, so say I were to like remove this nullability check right here. I'm going to get a compiler error. So this is actually TypeScript working for me and helping me to write smarter code. Thanks to the types that we have coming from Apollo and the Apollo CLI, those propagate all the way down through my React tree and help me catch errors before they happen, which is really awesome. So I'm just going to put that back so we don't have any more errors. Okay, yeah, so that is my second demo. That is the Apollo development experience with TypeScript, which is pretty cool. So the third demo and the last demo that I have for you all today is a little bit future forward. It's actually managing your local state with Apollo. So this is really cool. Oftentimes when I'm developing apps, I have this piece of data that comes back from the server, and I want to be able to augment it with some sort of like local field. So for example, I have like a shopping cart app or something, and I get a product that comes back from the server, and I maybe want to augment that product with a field that says whether or not it's in the customer's cart, for example. That's a really common use case. So we're actually going to do an example of that right now. So we have this subreddit that comes back from the server. And you'll see here that one of the differences between this app and the Redux one is I haven't integrated that last updated timestamp yet. So I'm actually going to use Apollo State to kind of build out that feature. So what's really cool is all you have to do is just specify the local field that you want with a client directive. So here I'm just going to go and I'm going to say last updated at client. And that's going to give me an error. And that's because this field is not in my schema yet. So what do I have to do? I have to write a client schema in order to model this data so my editor is aware. So I'm just going to go over here and const schema or typedefs equals, I'm just going to wrap it with GQL. And I'm just going, the first thing that I'm going to do, kind of like actually how James showed you in the Federation demo, how he was extending those types from a particular service to kind of augment them in another service, we're going to do the same thing on the client. So we're just going to extend that type, the subreddit type, and I'm going to add this last updated field, and I'm going to say it's a Boolean. And once I do that, those errors will actually just go away. So Apollo VS Code is not only aware of your remote schema, it's actually aware of your client schema too, which is pretty cool. So the next thing that you want to do after you create your client schema is you want to hook that data up to resolvers so you can actually use it in your app. So the next thing I'm going to do is just create a resolver map. And this is exactly the same API that we do on the server. So I'm just going to create a resolver for subreddit, call it last updated. And when this resolver runs, I want it to generate this date timestamp that we have here. So I'm just going to call that function, generate date. And then once I have my resolvers and I have my client schema, I'm going to tell Apollo client about it. So I'm going to go into here, and I am going to just call client.addResolvers. So what's really cool is you can add these resolvers when you instantiate the Apollo client instance, or you can add them dynamically within your components. And that's for code splitting purposes. We want, obviously to make sure that your app is performant and we're not, over increasing your bundle sizes. So we've added kind of that functionality for you to dynamically add those resolvers. So I'm just going to save here. And hopefully I don't get any errors. Good, awesome. Whoa, I made the front page of Reddit. That's pretty cool. Awesome. Oh, we're two posts on there. That's pretty dope. I didn't plan that. Okay, sorry. So then once I have my data, I'm just going to go in here and I'm actually going to render it. So data.subreddit.lastUpdated. I'm going to hit save and cross my fingers that this worked. Yay! Okay, so then when I hit refresh, my timestamp will automatically update with the new time. So pretty cool. Yeah, that's how you update your local state with Apollo Client. But I'm not done yet. I have one more bonus demo to show you. So remember how I said that your type definitions automatically update when you add fields? They also automatically update when you add local state to your queries as well. So not only is your remote data typed, your local data is also typed. And we think it's really important to kind of combine those into one query because oftentimes your components are made of local and remote data. So we really wanted to have all the tools kind of work together and work seamlessly and have just this kind of familiar, intuitive programming model that you expect on the server and also extend that to the client. So that's the Apollo developer experience in a nutshell.